Okay, welcome to the final go-to session of the month. We are in the home stretch. I hope everybody's excited. Week 4, we're almost done. I know the class moves fast. I know there's a lot to keep track of, but we're almost at the finish line, so hang in there, okay? The good news is I'm going to try to keep this session pretty short because I don't have that much to go over tonight. I mostly want to discuss peer review, which is the main activity for this week, in addition to your final version of your presentation. And then I do want to give some reminders excuse me, some reminders about what we're doing for that final presentation. Okay. As usual, the chat is actually acting kind of funny, but you can always go ahead and type things and I'll see them and I can read them out loud if you have questions or if you want to make comments. Okay, so let's begin with the main activity you have to do this week, which is peer review. If I go over to our course platform, everybody can hear me, right? I think I see my levels moving. But if someone wants to confirm that by typing yes into the chat board, that would be nice. Here, let me close this window. Nobody's typing anything. Okay, good. You guys frightened me. I once had that happen where I went half the session and nobody could hear me. And I think it's because I had forgotten to click some setting. But anyway, like that's my fault. But I was sort of angry at the students. It's like, how could you go 30 minutes without letting me know that you can't hear me? Okay, good. Okay, our course site. So here's the peer feedback discussion board. It looks a little bit different when you see it from the student's viewpoint. But as you can see, some people have already posted their work to the board, right? As you can see, because most presentations take the form of like a PowerPoint presentation or maybe used an online tool like Prezi. Probably you're just going to paste a link. It's not really practical to actually paste in the whole presentation right there in the discussion board. As you can see, some people already uploaded their work. Okay, so that's your first task. Technically, you were supposed to have this up by Monday night, but as long as you get things up by tonight, you should be okay. Let me check something real quick, which is the dates for this activity, because I wanted to point something out. Where are we? Peer review. Okay, peer feedback. So here it is, 4.3 discussion. Okay, so yeah, if you can get your draft posted today or early tomorrow, just so you give everybody enough time to respond. I want to mention something. I'm going to mention here in the go-to session, but I'm also going to change the assignment description and send out an announcement. Actually, let me go back into that activity. If you read the instructions or if you look at the description here, it mentions that you're going to be assigned 3 classmates to respond to. I'm going to try out something different this month. Instead of assigning you 3 people to respond to, I'm going to trust you. Okay? Jelana says she can't hear me. Are other people still hearing me okay? Okay, Corey says yes. What was I saying? Oh, yeah, you're going to be assigned 3 classmates, but I'm going to try something different this month. Okay, and I'm going to send out announcements so everybody's on the same page. I'm going to trust people, and I'm going to leave it to you to choose 3 classmates to respond to. Okay? But there are a couple rules that you have to keep in mind. First of all, make sure that you give attention to those who have not yet received feedback, because of what I don't want to see is, especially when people wait until the final moments of the activity to do the work, is they come to the peer review discussion board. Okay, I don't have it open anymore, but they see like the very first person and they'll respond to them because I don't know, the student isn't really, they're just trying to complete the activity, so they just grab the first name they see, or maybe the first 3 names that they see, which means that whoever's at the top of the page gets a ton of feedback, but people who posted further below get none. So I don't want to see that. So make sure that you're responding to people who have not yet received commentary, okay? Because the idea here is that everybody should at least be getting several responses to their draft, in addition to my own feedback. By the way, I'm working on your presentation drafts, right? We instructors aim for a 72-hour turnaround time. So I'm going to burn the midnight oil to get feedback to you by tomorrow night at midnight. Okay, so that should give you enough time to read my feedback, consider it, then make revisions for your final presentation, which is due Sunday, the final day of this class, which is August 2nd. But I hope this makes sense. Okay, you're going to post your presentation draft, what you handed in this past Sunday, to the discussion board, and then you're going to respond to 3 of your classmates' efforts. Now, what are you going to do as a response? The good news is you have a document. Oops, actually, I wanted to stay on that page. Go back. You have this document here, peer feedback guide. Okay, you also have the instruction sheet. But when you click on the peer feedback guide, oops, that's not it. There it is. You get questions that you need to respond to, right? Respond to the following prompts for each presentation that you review. So here's the questions. What did you find most effective about the presentation? Explain. Which parts of the presentation was most difficult to follow? Explain and offer suggestions, and so on. Based on what you've learned this month in creative presentation, what advice do you have? What techniques, skills, qualities from the course materials did this presentation use and exemplify? Okay, so you have very, very specific questions to answer. And you should be answering them with care and with some depth. Okay, so we're not just writing 1 or 2 words for each of these questions. We're not racing through them. Remember earlier we had some discussion assignments, and I can't remember the people who are with us live in the room tonight. But for some students, I had to say your responses weren't very thoughtful because some people were writing just a sentence or 2, right? They were writing "good job," or "oh, I'm so glad you chose this TED Talk presentation because I love hip hop music too," and then that was it. Okay, that's not really thoughtful feedback. So we're answering each of these questions with care. But if you're doing this, okay, there are 4 questions for 3 people's presentations, then you should be okay. You should be all right. So nobody should feel lost here. Nobody should feel like I don't know what to say, or I don't know what to respond to, or I don't know how to form a thoughtful, in-depth response. Because if you're answering these questions fully, you should automatically be doing that. Okay. So yeah, you're basically answering these 4 questions for 3 different students, and you're making sure that students who have not yet received feedback do so. The challenge is that in the past I've done the assign each of you 3 people to respond to, but then what happens is who's with us tonight? Corey. I say, Corey, you must review John, Mark, and Susan's paper. And then sometimes what happens is that Mark and Susan never submit a presentation, and Corey gets confused. So there are dangers with either option. I mean, when I allow students to choose 3 students on their own, sometimes they don't listen to my advice and they don't choose someone who hasn't yet received feedback. They just grab the first person that they see because they're trying to complete the activity as quickly as possible. Don't do that, okay? Take time, be thoughtful, make sure that you spread your feedback around. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the peer review assignment. It's really basic. Okay, you're going to post your presentation draft to the board, and then you're going to respond to 3 of your classmates using these questions. I have a few other just quick tips to give. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint presentation. In general, when it comes to peer feedback, I have like 3 basic tips to keep in mind. First of all is be positive, right? I mean, yes, you should be honest in your feedback. One of the questions asks you to identify what is not very effective in the presentation. So you should be providing frank, honest advice, but that doesn't mean you're going to be mean, okay? You're going to stay positive. We're here to help one another. So keep that in mind, okay? Because one of the things with online communication is that when we meet face-to-face, we can use non-verbal cues to help communicate things, right? Like we can smile, you can hear our tone of voice, etc. But those things are missing when you're just communicating with words online. So be careful because sometimes people can take things the wrong way. But if you're staying positive, that probably won't happen. My second big tip is to be specific. Okay, just writing "good job," or "I thought this presentation was awesome," or "it looked pretty good, but I got a little bit confused at one point." Okay, but what point? Where specifically in the presentation were you confused? Or what specifically was working well? Okay, peer advice only really works if you're going to be specific. There's nothing more frustrating than just getting general feedback where you, the creator, the presenter, isn't sure what to work on or what to improve because the people who've responded to you have not been specific, right? That they've sort of mailed in the response. They're writing lots of generic things, but they're not writing specific things. So yes, be specific. And feedback tip number 3, this kind of echoes something that I just mentioned. When you do offer criticism or constructive feedback, use softeners and qualifiers. Excuse me. Now, what do I mean by that? The reason I chose this picture here, the throw pillows that spell out the words love, is because we don't have those nonverbal cues available to us when we're just writing online. We can be careful with the way that we say things, right? Softeners and qualifiers means saying things like, "Oh, here I was a bit confused," or "I was a little bit thrown by this section." Right? We add these little softeners like a bit or a little, or right, instead of saying things 100% directly. It doesn't mean that we're sugarcoating things. It doesn't mean that we're avoiding giving really, really specific feedback. But when we do so, we're aware that we have to kind of say things carefully. So keep those 3 feedback tips in mind. Okay, so be positive, be specific, and when you do offer constructive criticism, use softeners and qualifiers. I've already noticed on the board, and this isn't a criticism, but I've already noticed on the board, some people have started responding to one another, and that's great, but they're not answering the questions on the sheet. So to those people, if you watch this session later, the recording of it, you are absolutely allowed to go back and edit your feedback comments, okay? You're allowed to go back and redo them. Again, I love to see people jumping in on the board and contributing already, but I already see some problems where people aren't reading through the assignment instructions. They aren't reading through all the documents. They're just jumping into the fray and responding. There are actually specific questions to cover. Okay, the other big thing that's due, of course, is your final version of your presentation, which is due on Sunday. Let me see the assignment sheet. That's not it. Here it is. And this was given to you when you worked on your planning activity. Remember way back when you had to create kind of like an outline? You had to show me what ideas you were thinking of when it came to your presentation. And this document was actually one of your uploadable assets, or I should say downloadable assets, because you needed to look at the final project assignment sheet to get an idea what you're working toward. This is just a reminder that if you've never looked at that document, you should, so you know what you're doing for this Sunday's final assignment. I'm not going to read this entire thing out loud because you have this available to you. But, there's some important reminders here on page 2 that you should be using a tool that you're familiar with for this assignment, one that allows for both visual and recorded oral presentation. Okay, so there are 2 things required there. There's some sort of visual component. Many of you will use presentation software, for instance, but it also has to have recorded voiceover. Okay, we need to hear your voice. This isn't a public speaking class in the sense that you don't have to stand in front of a classroom, nor do you have to appear on camera if you don't want to, but there does have to be some sense of your presence, which for this assignment is your actual physical voice. And you can read through the rest of this assignment sheet on your own, because actually in the rest of my slides, I'm going to remind you of what you're doing for this assignment. So let's take a look at that. And these are reminders, okay? Reminders for the final presentation that we're working on. First of all, remember the basics, okay? Let's keep things really simple. I know the assignment sheets, there are a lot of them. There are a lot of details. There are a lot of thought questions. There are a lot of things to keep in mind. And then at the same time, you have these go-to sessions. You have tons of textbook readings, and the information can seem overwhelming. But really, it's pretty simple, okay? We're working toward a 3 to 5 minute presentation. In this presentation, you are going to imagine that you are a recent Full Sail graduate. Okay, so we're projecting about probably 2 years into the future. You've just finished Full Sail. You just earned your degree in music production or digital cinematography or show production, etc. Okay, And essentially, you are presenting yourself to a prospective employer. Okay, that's it. A 3 to 5 minute presentation where you present yourself to a prospective employer as a recent Full Sail graduate. Now, if you want to imagine a very, very specific employer, like an actual employer, and tailor your presentation for that company, great. It doesn't have to be a specific employer, though. But yes, employers in general is who we're speaking to. So those are the basics. Don't forget about that. It's not that complicated of a concept. Uh, Reminder number 2, choose a presentation tool, and specifically choose a presentation tool that you are comfortable with. So yes, this can include things like PowerPoints or Keynote or Prezi, which is an online presentation tool. A couple things that you might not consider are things like screen recording software and film editing software. Because these presentations require voiceover narration, there are ways to do that. Let's see, let me go back to the internet. By screen recording tools, I mean things like Screencast-O-Matic. Okay, this isn't the only screen recording tool, but it's a pretty famous one. If you just Google screen recording software, you'll get lots of choices. And it's really simple as just following the steps. You can read through the tutorials on your own, or you can just click on the start recording button. But essentially, whatever appears on your screen will be captured. At the same time, you can record your voice over what's being captured. So if you're really sort of scared by technology and you're not sure what to do, this is a really simple technique because, for example, you can have your presentation already, open it into slideshow mode or full screen mode, and just record yourself talking over the presentation. QuickTime, okay, I'm going to open up my version of QuickTime, is a Mac. It's an Apple product, but it's also available for PC, so it's not exclusive to Apple. But it also has a, excuse me, basic screen recording function. So if I go to File, New Screen Recording, okay, this little guy opens up, and you just have to click here to make sure that you're chosen audio input. Right now I'm using a headset, so that's selected. And then it's just a matter of clicking on this button and then clicking on the screen, and boom, just like Screencast-O-Matic, it's going to capture whatever is on my screen, and at the same time, I can speak. So if you're really afraid of technology, basic screen recording software is simple. On the other hand, you probably don't even need to use that stuff because whatever presentation tool you're using is going to have recording functions built into it. For example, if I go back to my PowerPoint presentation, right? So this was, we're in PowerPoint. You have all these tabs here. Probably lots of times you don't click on any of the other tabs, but if you click on the slideshow tab, you have this little guy here, record slideshow, and you can just click on there and then record narration for a specific slide. And what's great about this too is that because you're going slide by slide, you're not under pressure to have to read your entire 3 to 5 minute script at once. You can just record it one bit at a time, one slide at a time. You have some other tools here like Rehearse, which allows you to practice and check out how your presentation is going before you're finished with it. But yeah, this simple record function here allows you to record audio to accompany any of your slides. Okay. And I know, well, I do know this for a fact. Even though I've never tried Prezi, it's a little bit surprising. You think that teaching this class, I would have tried Prezi, but I know that from student submissions, Prezi has a recording feature as well. Prezi is online presentation software. If you've never used Prezi, it's kind of a niftier version of Keynote or PowerPoint. Prezi is technically what they call 2.5D software, meaning it looks kind of 3D because the camera zooms in, out, things swirl back and forth. So it has this really dynamic quality to it. It's not truly 3D though, but it sort of mimics that. Anyway, that's an online presentation tool, but it also has a recording function in it. Keynote does as well. Okay, so probably you don't have to use that screen recording software. Film editing software can be really useful because even if you're not a filmmaker, there's some neat things you can do with film software. For example, For Mac, there's a program called iMovie that I love. This is exclusive to Mac. Okay, so it's not available for PC, but even though it's been a while since I've used PCs, as you know, Full Sail is all about Mac. So even though you guys have not gotten your MacBook Pros yet, you'll probably get them in month 3 or 5. If you're a campus student, you might have gotten it already. But if you're an online student, I think you get them around month 3 or 4. But yeah, and we faculty members here at Full Sail also get MacBook Pro. So it's been a long time since I've used a PC. But I'm guessing that a program like Windows Movie Maker functions probably pretty similarly to iMovie. Anyway, iMovie, which I have open here because I just want to show you some things. Even if you're not creating a film, because that's what iMovie is, right? It's basic video software, film software. You can also use it as a presentation tool. For example, one of the cool things about iMovie, if you can see my screen, you see the map of the United States. That's a map that I created using a mixture of different tools, but ultimately I brought it into PowerPoint. And if I go back to my PowerPoint, I can take any slide and save it in the form that I want. For example, I don't have to save it as a PowerPoint presentation. I could save it as a JPEG. And once I save an individual slide as a JPEG, I can then drag it into a program like iMovie, which is how I got this picture of the map of the United States. Or, for example, this quick fact sheet that I created. I created that real quickly in PowerPoint as well, saved it as a JPEG, and then dropped it into iMovie. Now, why even bother with iMovie then? Because iMovie has lots of cool things. You can add music because the program already has music files built into it. You can add sound effects. You can add fancy transitions. I know that PowerPoint and Keynote have transition functions as well, but the transitions in iMovie are more cinematic. And you can also, again, here's the little microphone icon, so I can record my script in chunks. So, for example, for this map of the United States, I'll read and record the script that accompanies this. And then when I'm happy with it, I can keep it. And I can click on the image and change the length of the image so it matches the amount of time of my recording. But yeah, I'm not going to show the whole thing, and plus you can't hear sound on your end. That's me, by the way, looking pretty pretty terrible. they say the camera adds what, 10, 15 pounds. It looks like it's added about 100 pounds here. But I'm gonna let this roll a little bit, and I'm gonna point out a couple things. So let me pause. There's me. Okay, so this is me. I'm at home. It's a little bit awkward. I actually got dressed up. I'm wearing a suit coat. I'm sitting in front of my bookshelf. Probably if anybody passed by my apartment window, they wondered why this guy is all dressed up, speaking to himself in the middle of the night. But that was me. I decided that I would begin my presentation, which wasn't created for this class, by the way. It was created for a different course at Full Sail. But I decided to be on camera. Okay, I'm not on camera very much in the presentation, but I am at the beginning. And you can see I get to put in these elements, like there's my name and my function, right? So it kind of looks like, I don't know, those things you see on television, like CNN interviews or documentaries, right, where someone appears on camera, but you also get a description of who they are underneath. Like those are cool things I can do using iMovie. So let me keep it going a little bit. Okay, there I am talking. And notice I actually was working from a script, and I'm speaking into the camera. And now we'll see a transition. And there's actually some piano music playing in the background that's provided by iMovie. It's sound bank of files. Okay, and then my presentation continues. And here's a good example, right? This is just an image that I found, dropped it into the program, and even though you can't hear my voiceover, I'm speaking right now. Okay, so every image is accompanied with my voiceover narration. I'm going to go ahead and stop this because we don't have to watch. It's kind of like a silent movie from your end. But there is some possibilities too with film editing software. I guess that's what I'm saying. I'm going to go ahead and close this because iMovie is a hog. So yeah, if you're comfortable with things like that, go ahead and use it. By the way, in terms of appearing on camera, you do not have to appear on camera. I would say that most students do not. And if you do like to be on camera, you better have a good reason for being on camera. I don't see it often, but there are occasionally students who hand in somewhat awkward presentations because they just open up their laptop, turn on the camera, start speaking into it, and they don't stop for 3 minutes. And sometimes they're not even looking at the camera. They're looking down at the sheet of paper in their hands as they literally read out loud. Like, that's not a presentation. That's not very professional or very interesting or very polished. And it also begs the question, like, why is the person even appearing on camera? So, yeah, I mean, if you're comfortable in being in front of the camera, great, but you certainly don't have to. And I'm sorry, I'm reading someone's comments. But yeah, if you're comfortable doing so, you can try it out if you wish. Okay, so those are your different presentation tools. Next reminder, keep in mind key concepts that we've been learning all month long. Again, I know there's been a lot of information, right? I cover a lot in these go-to sessions. The textbook readings cover lots of material. Okay, there's a lot to keep in mind. And I hope people have been doing the readings because there is a lot of useful stuff in there. But anyway, just some key concepts that we've covered this month. Make sure that your presentation has a beginning, middle, and ending. I mean, it's going to, just by default. I mean, you're not going to literally start in the middle of your presentation with some random detail that makes no sense. Everybody's going to start somewhere. But remember, there are ways to start. You might begin with a startling fact or statistic and use that as a way to transition into your larger presentation. Or you might begin with a powerful quotation from history, a previous president, a Greek philosopher, maybe a current person from the industry, Mark Zuckerberg, or what's her name, the female CEO of Yahoo? Melissa Meyer, right? Like, you can begin with a quotation, or you can begin with a short personal story or anecdote. I mean, think back to those TED Talk presentations. This is the reason why we had you analyze them, because those presenters tend to use a variety of different tools in their presentations, so you can learn something from them. So yes, your presentations will naturally have a beginning, middle, or end, but there are specific techniques you can use. For example, to kick off your presentation, or to end it. You might end it with one of those techniques, or you might begin with a personal anecdote and then return to it at the end, because that's a nice way to sort of tie up loose ends and bring everything all together. That's actually a neat trick, that you end the presentation the way you started. Other things like a star moment. Okay, remember STAR? It stands for something they'll always remember. Hopefully there is one sort of key moment in your presentation that stands out. It might be a particular slide that you're proud of. Ideally, it should be a particular moment that you're proud of, not just because it looks slick or seems original, but because it also communicates information. Like, there probably should be at least one moment in your presentation that everybody will remember. Like, they'll walk out of your presentation or walk away from your presentation really remembering that. Just some other real quick things. Effective visuals, okay? We've been talking about that all month, that just throwing words on a slide isn't very interesting. If you're just going to put text on a slide, what's the point in having a presentation in the first place? So powerful visuals are important, right? A picture, what's the cliche? A picture is worth 1,000 words. Repeatable sound bites. Okay, we talked about this last week in last week's go-to session. President Obama's "Yes, we can" is a good example of a repeatable, memorable soundbite, but it doesn't have to be something like that. It could be just your dedication to, for example, repeating key concepts or key phrases throughout your presentation. I think last week I gave the example of Steve Jobs when he introduced the iPhone. He kept using the distinct phrase reinvent the phone. Right? And he keep using varieties, reinvent the phone, reinventing the phone. This is a reinvention of the phone. Like, that's not on accident, okay? That's on purpose. And then finally, basic design principles. Chapter 6 in Slideology, which I've been mentioning several times already, is probably the most useful chapter, because if you're not familiar with design principles, that gives you sort of a crash course. For example, we don't just throw things on the page. We actually make choices. Okay, we don't just choose any font. We choose one that's appropriate. For example, I went and found this image of a sticky note because I knew that would represent a reminder. And I chose this font. Okay, I actually looked at some others, but this was the best font. It was the clearest. There were several handwriting looking fonts, but this one was the one that was easiest to read. Okay, so I didn't just grab the first thing and threw it on the page. But anyway, Chapter 6 in Slideology covers other design principles. For example, slides. The space can be divided into grids, sometimes thirds, so like a top third, a middle third, a bottom third, or it could be viewed vertically in terms of thirds, a left third, a middle third, a right third. Okay, and it doesn't have to be viewed in thirds. It can be viewed in fourths, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And that we're trying to put elements on the page carefully and create balance. We're not just throwing things on the page. No, I do not expect people to already be design experts. Some of you have sharp design skills. Some of you already, when I was looking at your work, were creating pretty powerful presentations. Like some people created PowerPoints for their TED Talk analyses. And some people were already quite impressive with design. But it's not that I expect you to be design experts, but I do want you to have some awareness. I want to have some sense that you're trying. Okay, so maybe the execution isn't flawless, but you're trying. You're not just throwing things on a slide and calling it a presentation. Reminder number 4: create a script. Okay, we're not just winging it. We're not just turning on the record function and speaking out loud. Okay, we have a plan. We have a plan for our presentation in terms of the layout and slides if you're using traditional presentation software, but we're also having a plan in terms of voiceover, okay? And that means having a script. First, record your script in chunks. If you put pressure on yourself to read the entire 3 to 5 minutes out loud, guess what's going to happen? You're going to stumble. You're going to have to clear your throat. You're going to pause and go, like... your voice may go dry, or your voice might give out. Okay, that's why you record it in chunks, so you have less pressure to get it all right because you're recording shorter pieces. And then if there is a flaw in it, you can re-record it, and it doesn't take so long. You don't have to re-record the entire 5 minutes. You just have to re-record. I don't know, 20 seconds. Okay. Be sure that the voiceover is polished and professional. So yeah, you're eliminating stumbles. If you hear yourself slip up, you're going to go back and re-record it. If your voice gives out, or maybe your voice is fine, but it's too soft. We can barely hear you, or it's too loud, or your energy isn't quite right. Okay, you can go back and re-record those things and make sure that they're perfect. And finally, if possible, yes, use a headphone or a mic. I know not everybody has these things, but if you do, use them. If you don't, make sure that you're in a quiet environment. Okay, and make sure that you test out maybe a few dry runs first. Record yourself just saying anything. You record some gibberish, and then see how it's sounding. Does it sound okay, or is it sounding tinny, or is it sounding like you're a million miles away? And then see if you can make adjustments. Maybe you have to get closer to the computer speakers. Maybe you have to move farther away. But most of these problems get solved if you can use a headset or mic. And finally, and this should be perhaps the most obvious, proofread your work. Okay, make sure that the text that does appear in your slides is free of errors. I mean, how impressed would employers be if your presentation contains grammar errors or misspellings? Think about it in terms of like a resume and cover letter. Imagine you hand in a resume that's just filled with mistakes. What is that employer going to think? Okay, so yeah, make sure that you proofread. And also, and I've stressed this before, and I'm going to stress it again, listen to your presentation from the perspective of someone who is not you. Okay, because already when I was grading your outlines, your planning presentations, so not your actual rough draft of your presentation, but the plan you created, I already had to point out to some people that I was a little bit confused, that I wasn't getting things, and that the reason this was happening is because the student was too much in her or his head, which, by the way, is completely natural. I'm not trying to be mean. This is a problem, right? We think that the ideas in our head are perfectly clear and that they're perfectly understandable. We think that the connections that we see or that we make are immediately understandable to others, but sometimes they're not. And we can catch a lot of these problems if we look at our work from the perspective of someone who is not us. The great thing about the peer review activity is that when you get feedback, you'll be getting feedback from hopefully at least 3 people who have looked at your presentation with a fresh set of eyes, right? When you choose someone's presentation to respond to, it'll be the first time you're seeing it. You might not have any familiarity with that person's industry or field of study. You're seeing that person's work for the first time. So you're going to have a really, really valuable, there's really valuable potential here for input, because you will be that fresh set of eyes that will be able to point out, oh, this seems confusing, or I don't understand the connection you're making, or you went from one slide to another and I'm sure it makes sense to you, but to me, I didn't understand how we were moving from one point to another. Okay. So hopefully you'll get some of these things pointed out to you during peer review, but you can also catch them yourself if you just step outside of yourself and look at your presentation from the perspective of someone who is not you. Questions? I told you today's session will be shorter, so yeah, we've gone about 40 minutes. Woohoo! But now's the time to ask questions if you have them. Okay. This week is purposely kind of light. You have to do peer review, and you have to keep working on your final presentation. But otherwise, that's it. So anything that we went over tonight that was that you have questions about, or that was confusing, or you still need more details, more information, more explanation, now's the time to ask. If you are comfortable, on the other hand, with what we've gone over, and you think everything was covered with care, you are free to leave and enjoy the rest of your evening. I'm not going to trap you here, but I will stick around for a little bit to answer questions if you have them. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.